Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest NASS Facebook Live. Today we're talking about making the most of your remote consultation. I think that might have just come in, apologies. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the latest Facebook Live with the National Axial Spondyloarthritis Society. My name's Will Gregory. I'm a consultant physiotherapist at Salford Royal Hospital up in Manchester. And I've got a topic of making the most of your virtual consultation. And I've got about 20 to 25 minutes of things I'd like to talk through. And hopefully there'll be some questions and discussions that will take us through to the half hour or just slightly longer if you can spare that time. Welcome if you're joining us live. And of course, you're very welcome to watch this back. And I hope it's useful for you, however you're viewing this. Thanks very much to NASS for inviting me to be involved, and thanks also to Zoe Clark, who is sitting on the chat function on Facebook, who will answer any queries or point them to my attention, and also has got some online resources to share as and when's appropriate as we go through. So we've now reached a stage for us, certainly at Salford, where we're kind of 3.5 months now into this process of changing everything to remote consultation. So hopefully I can tell you all the mistakes I've made with that process over the last 3.5 months that will help you to have a better consult when you get your next review with rheumatology. Perhaps you've had one in the last few months and already have some experience of what this is like. So I'm going to talk a little bit about making the most of your appointment generally, some tips that I found online and some experience of my own, I suppose, but also try and tie it into the remote consultations that we're now offering and how that's going to change things for you at your next review. So headlines for today's session. Well, firstly, the research is pretty solid that remote consultations are convenient, and they have good feedback from the people using them, both staff side and patient side as well. So even without the COVID restrictions, perhaps there was a move towards remote consults for some of your care. And some of you may have had that experience in the last few years already. For others of you, it will be a brand new idea. Why are we doing it? Well, partly it's to reduce the infection risk for our patients and also for the staff. It allows those staff that might be shielding or living with someone who's shielding to still provide a service from their own home, as we can do it over the phone or on the internet. And it's a way to ensure we still see you when we need to see you, despite the restrictions that we currently have. Even now, as restrictions are perhaps lifting a little bit, we're still strongly encouraged from our management in the hospital to decrease the amount of footfall through the hospital. And in fact, the latest document says until the end of September, we should aim all of our consultations for outpatients to be virtual or remote as the first choice. If we have to see people face to face, we can, but the expectation is at least until the end of September, we'll be switching most all consults to face to face. A little bit on terminology, because the title of the talk talks about a virtual consult, and I've mentioned a remote consult, and it's taken a while of me reading to get through this with the way the NHS use the terminology. So the first thing is that virtual consult means something slightly different. So this has been a term that's been around for a while, but the way it's used in the NHS is that a virtual consult is a consult where there's a number of different clinicians or healthcare professionals looking at your case, but you're not actually there. And the virtual element is that you're not there when that consult happens. So the one in rheumatology is usually the virtual biologics clinic. So you'll have seen somebody in the team, they'll have recommended a biologic medication perhaps, and then it needs to be considered by the team as a wider team. So there'll be a meeting which counts as this virtual consult of perhaps the pharmacist, the doctor, your specialist nurse, and some others involved to feed forwards the opinions you've had and throw in the opinions from the specialists, as well as reviewing that you've had all the investigations you might need and you meet the criteria to commence that new medication. The other virtual one I see quite a lot of is the virtual spinal clinic. So when we refer somebody to the spinal surgeons, rather than have a patient seen face to face, they'll review the case perhaps with the radiologist and the surgeons to decide if they feel they could offer surgery, and then if it's a yes from that virtual consult, you'll then be invited in. So virtual consult is a consult where you're not necessarily there for it, whereas a remote consult, from the NHS terminology, is one way it is your usual appointment, but instead of being in the same room as your healthcare professional, you're at a remote location, which might be your home, but perhaps for convenience, it could be your workplace. And that's the exciting bit, I think, that we've seen over the last few months, and something that could run longer term is the ability for you to do your 30-minute or 20-minute appointment with rheumatology in your normal day at work. So rather than it being a 3-hour commitment of driving here and parking and all the rest that goes with it, for some follow-ups, a phone call or a video call will do the business, and it means you can do it within your work time if you're working. And we do hope there's more people with this diagnosis who are able to work, and therefore we can make the appointments fit within your routine there. Okay, so what would you want to do when you're considering coming for an appointment? Well, I suppose we do recommend having some time for you to prepare for it. We know that on average, and this is data taken from the NASS website, you spend about 2 hours each year with a health professional discussing your AS or Axial SpA. And this leaves you 8,758 hours where you have to manage the condition by yourself. So that is a really tiny chunk of your year that is spent face-to-face or over the phone or on the video with your AS healthcare professional. So we need to make sure that you can maximise what you get out of that, and we can get as much information as we can to give you the best solutions. So I think this probably happens all the time, but we've been doing a lot more of it and more intentionally with the change to remote consultations. And for me, it takes about 10 minutes to prep for somebody coming in, which is normally done perhaps a week before or the evening before, where we'll look through your previous clinic letters, perhaps some investigations that you might have had or blood tests that have just been fed back, and try and get a picture of where you are, what's been thought of previously, and look at your agreed management plan from the previous consult. So we're probably spending 5 to 10 minutes researching you before we see you again. And it's now in our policies for our remote consults, certainly here at Salford, that it should be done at least 2 weeks in advance to see if that patient needs to be switched from a remote consult to a face-to-face. So that is us investing 10 minutes on our appointment before we meet. And I'd be keen, as a patient group, if you could invest 10 minutes before the consult, thinking about what you want from it, where your issues are, and preparing as best you can to get the best outcome for everyone involved. There are some limitations to remote consultations. I mean, the most obvious one is we wouldn't manage to do blood tests or perhaps x-rays on the day if you're over the phone. We can't give injections over the phone, over video, obviously. But then there are more subtle differences we're finding, and this is in the research as well, in that we potentially lose that non-verbal communication. And it's important that we try and find strategies to make up for that. So it could be somebody's asking you about a medication and suggesting you try medication X. When we do that in clinic, we might see your face kind of recoil when we mention it because you've had it before, or your friend had it and it didn't work for them, or whatever it may be. But we don't necessarily get that over the phone. So if you're speaking to us over the phone for this appointment, do be keen to share everything you're thinking, because we're losing some of those non-verbal cues, the smile, the frown that you might be throwing at us that gets lost over the phone. If you look at the kind of NHS recommendations for how we do these appointments, it does say phone call as first choice. I think we're all dabbling in some video consults as well, and obviously if we can see you over video, we will see your expression when we discuss things, which will give us some of those non-verbal cues. But I think the policy is phone first, and certainly for us at Salford, we've got quick enough to be able to switch from a phone call to a video consult during that 20 to 30 minute time slot we have for you on our diary, so we could just immediately switch from a phone call to a video if it's needed. Have a think about how you'd like to describe your problems for us. So it's been quite interesting for me as a physiotherapist, and my job is quite physical, when the patient will say on the phone, it's my shoulder, it hurts here. And then you have to say, okay, is it front of the shoulder, back of the shoulder, near the shoulder blade? Is it nearer the spine or nearer the outside? And try and get that description. Generally, that does kind of work, but occasionally we'll have to switch to video to have a look of it. There's some interesting discussion about switching to video and how we do that for you as best as we can. And I've had some feedback that some of my colleagues have offered this, and the patient on the end of the phone has said, "Oh, you're going to video me, but my house is such a mess." But we're not here to assess how tidy or messy your house is. Really, don't worry what the background of your house looks like. However, if you know you're going to have a video consult, or you'd like to plan for a video consult, it could be worth just thinking, how are you going to position your phone or your laptop or your pad so it can video you and video the area you'd like to show to your healthcare professional. I'll come back to that. So what would we like you to think about in relation to the appointment? Well, as I've said, it could be your doctor, your nurse, your physiotherapist, your healthcare professional is self-isolating themselves or with a household member. So it could be that they're contacting you from home. And I suppose I'm saying that partly because we're asking you to bear with us a little bit as we're getting used to new ways of working ourselves, as you're getting used to new ways of being looked after by us. So I've had a few conversations with people over the phone where we've had to slightly deviate from what was the plan. I had one memorable patient who was just helping his daughter move into her new flat as the phone call came, and actually he was expecting me to be the emergency plumber who was due to sort out a boiler problem they'd discovered. And within a half a minute of me speaking to this chap, he then got a second phone call, presumably on another line, from the plumber, and quite rightly he felt the plumber for his daughter's new accommodation was more important than me talking about his AS. So he took that call, and I quietly sat in the background for a few minutes whilst that was done, continued to study the case and preparing for what we were going to talk about, and then came back to him after. You know, these disruptions happen, and they can happen your side, and they can unfortunately happen our side as well. But if we have been cautious and looked at your notes in advance, even if we have a slow internet connection or an issue, when we're speaking to you, we should still have some paper record of what we'd like to do. Who do you want with you on the consult? So if it's a phone call, it could be you want to be on speakerphone so that your friend, your partner can be with you on the consult to help you remember the things you want to talk about. If that is the case, it's worth you just telling us, oh, actually, I've got so-and-so with me here as well. And we'd like to maintain your privacy. So if it is perhaps the two of you on the consult, well, that's all that we'd want there. We don't want the whole extended family on the end of the phone chipping in or necessarily hearing all of your medical history and details. So how should the consult go? Well, ideally, we'll have written to you. And, you know, if this wasn't a pandemic we're living through and we decided to phase this in gradually, you'd have got a letter saying, look, we'd like to look at remote consults. Would you be interested in being a guinea pig with us, trialing this out? And you're going to get a phone call at this time and it will last for this long, and these are the things we'd want you to have. And that should have happened even now with the pandemic ongoing. But I know, certainly for the people I'm speaking to, not always have they got the letter to advise them that it's going to be switched from a face-to-face to a phone call, or to give further details of what to expect from that remote consultation. So what would you want to think about technically? Well, we're really keen that we don't leave anyone behind. And if you don't have internet access, or you aren't confident with your phone or your pad or whatever else, then a telephone call, like I say, is first choice. And if that's the only way we can consult with you, then so be it. You know, we'll think about other ways around that. And if we do need to see things, it could then be a switch to a face-to-face. However, if you did want to take advantage of a potential video-based review, then it's just worth making sure your internet connection is up to speed, that you're in a quiet place, that you won't be disturbed, that your built-in camera's working, that your microphone's picking up, and so on. and it could be you want to do a test consultation with someone in your family on the video phone, just to see that you're happy, you can make yourself clear, and perhaps you can demonstrate how your elbow's not moving or whatever else it may be without it dropping off the edge of the film there. Think about the space where you're going to be when you have the consultation. Have you got room to demonstrate your exercises? Is it a fairly plain background so things can be seen? And lighting wise, the advice is to have artificial light over natural light, and ideally that light kind of above and in front of the computer, so it's shining down on you. I'm not sure my lighting is perfect here coming from behind me, and it does have quite an interesting area to shine off at the top of my head, so apologies if that's distracting. How would you prepare for the consultation? Like I say, try and set aside 10 minutes a day or two beforehand to think about it. Ideally, us as your healthcare professionals will have everything in front of us. So we will have your latest prescription, your investigations, your previous clinic letter, and so on. But occasionally things don't quite go as they should. And it's not a bad thing if you've got that information to also have it yourself beside you before the appointment. So if you had a list of your medications, that would be great. And even better if you wanted to scribble on that list when you take them, if they're helpful, if you get any side effects. That again will give us some good information for your review appointment. With an AS diagnosis, we're quite fortunate in the main outcome measures we use can be done outside the hospital. So if you've done your BASDI recently, you could have a look at the scores and let us know. And there's a basdi.com website that you can use to score yourself, or you can go to the MySpa app, or perhaps your local trust, the hospital that looks after you, has some kind of online collection or even a paper form for it. The consults are quite interesting. There's a couple of examples across the country where the need to switch from face-to-face to remote consultations has meant the team have agreed to extend the length of the consultations, which is great. We're not in that situation here at Salford. We're still at the same length as we ever were. So for you as a patient, it could just be worth thinking about the order of the things you want to tell us to make sure the most important things get discussed. And you can even start the consult by saying, look, these are the 4 things I'd like to discuss. And then us at healthcare professional side can make sure we work through those 4 during that consultation. And that's the same as if it was a face-to-face or a remote consultation. So you might want to have a look at your last clinic letter. What was the agreed management plan? Did you have any scans, x-rays, blood tests that you've heard back from or perhaps not heard back from? And how did you get on with the management plan? So if you were referred to podiatry, did the appointment happen? Was it helpful? If you were referred to physiotherapy, did that help? Was it helpful? Have you changed the medications that were suggested, and did it help when you did? And perhaps have a think about who else you might want in that consultation. So it could be you've got an appointment with the nurse and you think you'd like to discuss with your consultant. It could be you've got an appointment with the physio and you want to discuss with the nurse, and so on. So just sometimes it can be worth thinking about who are the best people to help you with your problems at that stage. And the same with any of these appointments. If you're on 6-monthly or 12-monthly review with us, try and think about how you've been over the past 6 months or the past 12 months since we saw you, rather than how you've been over the last 6 days or the last 12 days, to get more of a breadth of how you've been getting on. Booking wise, so we're doing the best we can to keep the appointment times, and in our trust the letter will go out saying your face-to-face appointment's been switched to a remote consultation, which will be a phone call. You will be phoned at the appointment time that was previously arranged, or within 30 to 60 minutes. So it gives us a bit of a window in case things get delayed in clinic, but it does mean that you're not sat by the phone for hours on end. There are other services that are using video conferencing as first choice, and they have wait rooms set up whereby your appointment might be 2 o'clock and you log on and there'll be a message quite clearly saying, actually you're 2 o'clock, we're running 15 minutes late, we'll be with you at 2:15. And that's really another level of support, really, to know when you're coming in. The other thing that's quite interesting I found with the phone call consults is it feels a little bit more personal, a bit more casual speaking over the phone than you might do behind a desk in a clinic where, you know, your patient's queued up at reception and waited in the wait room and had their weight done and their blood pressure done and such like. Just ringing somebody feels a bit more personal, a bit more connected. And certainly for my AS patients who I've been working with for many years, for some of them I've been working with for many years, it's quite nice to have that kind of a friendly consult, but make sure we're still covering the areas we need to cover. The advice document I read talked about waving at your doctor when they first come on you on the Visio. Whatever works for you, make sure you're comfortable with the consult. Introduction wise is quite important, and there is some guidance on this in that obviously we need to ring you and tell you who we are, why we're calling you and what our plans are over the next 20 to 30 minutes of the consult, but we also need to check that you are who you should be at the end of the phone. So we'll ask you your name, your date of birth and the first line of your address. So apologies we have to do that, but I think that's fairly standard across all the areas. So that's kind of taking the call. And I must say, in my experience, our communication hasn't been fantastic with letters getting out for appointments, particularly if we book them quite short notice. And sometimes people aren't expecting the call. And so I introduce myself and do my full spiel, and then we get chatting. And I think because they picked up the phone and thought it's going to be somebody selling me double glazing or whatever, they ignore the first 2 minutes of our conversation. And it's only when they click who I am, they then kind of come up to speed with the appointment, and about 5 minutes they'll say, just remind me who you said you were again. And that's because I think when we take phone calls, probably if they're on our landline or even on our mobile, we're quite good at screening them and trying to not get too involved with people that we don't want to speak to. So it's no problem if at any time during the appointment you can just press pause and say, remind me who you are and you know what we want to do with today's appointment, because sometimes we're catching you rather cold-footed with these alternative ways of consulting. So after your consultation, well, I've mentioned this agreed management plan, and that will be there for any appointment you've ever had, but it's probably more important to cover it on a phone call or video consult, because it could be a while until you get a letter, and equally any paperwork we might discuss with you, if we want to give you an exercise sheet or a drug information sheet, that may not arrive if it's coming via the post for a while, or if it comes on email or on a text message. Again, it can be a bit harder to access it kind of punctually, and we can't talk it through with you at the time. So again, I've had a few people do this as well, and I do it, I think, myself, in that at the end of the phone call I say, let me just check what we've talked through and what the plans are from here and what you're going to expect for your next appointment or your next investigation. And that's just a way to tie up the appointment. So I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to on the session. I know a few questions have come through, but just whilst have a look through those. The other things I should mention, I've failed in my role as a physiotherapist in not mentioning the summer stretch for NASS that's currently ongoing. Started on Monday, so you've got another 12 days worth of daily stretching for either 15, 30 or 45 minutes. Fantastic habits to get into. And if you can do it for a full 2 weeks, then it might become a longer term habit. The things you could access, so NASS has got the best set of resources for kind of exercise on its website, and it could be you want to look at the stretch videos that Emily did a few weeks ago. It could be you want to look at the stretches for daily life that the A Stretch team put together with NASS a few months ago. Or it could even be the Back to Action full pack resource from a few years ago that's working for you. Outside of exercise, well, there's My AS, My Life that you can have a look at. And also Zoe Clark's pretty much written up an article on making the most of your appointment, which will take in some of the queries from today's session before it's published in the next couple of weeks. So, so some good stuff to go to there as well. So let me just scan through the questions and see if I can help. Oh, well, here was some hellos. So hello everyone who's joined us. A good spread across the country. That's nice to see, and indeed internationally, I think. So there's a question here about a blood test done before lockdown. Okay, and you've not got your results yet. That's a bit frustrating, because if it was before lockdown, we're talking 4 months ago. So I suppose from that point of view, ring the secretary, whose phone number you should have, to speak to the team who perhaps did the blood tests, and just remind them that this is very unusual to be waiting that long. It could be the consultant was redeployed somewhere else and has only just come back, or whatever else, but that is a long wait and something that I think is worth chasing at this stage. Oh yes, and Zoe's answered that question quite similarly. Yes, you could go back to your GP is the other option there. Yeah. Yeah, and there's another discussion here about delayed input. We're really embarrassed about this. So there's a nice article on NASS that Leslie Kay's written, and it says your rheumatologist can't wait to welcome you back to our service, and that's the same for all of us healthcare professionals in rheumatology. We'd love to be able to offer you the usual quality of assessment and treatment we'd normally do and care with that, and we're doing our best to catch up. Some services have had lots of staff redeployed, others have been less impacted, and we're desperate to offer you the same level of assessment and care, and whether that's things that we do or your scans and your results from that. We know for some of you, the lockdown, the inability perhaps to use your hydrotherapy pool or to do your usual routine means you're more likely to have a flare of your disease, and that's something we're looking out for and trying to staff up for, so we can respond to what might be more work demand in the next few months. There's a message here from Jane. Yes, I'd agree. You weren't offered a video consult but had a telephone call from a registrar who I've never seen. That's difficult if it's somebody you've not met before. There's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that actually your first appointment should be face-to-face in an ideal situation. And then if we are going to go to remote, it would be the same clinician further down the line who's met you face-to-face. Obviously, with coronavirus, we couldn't do face-to-face, so things are a bit pushed on there. I think that message ends quite nicely, Jane. Thank you. Yeah, the telephone is the first communication method of choice, and like I say, for us, we can switch to video during the consult or book in a video consult a bit later. And Andrew, good question. Why is the medical world planning more video ones-to-ones? Physical meetings should be planned. Yeah, absolutely. I think this probably needs to be on a case-by-case basis, and it needs to be patient-led. We will be getting back to face-to-face appointments later this year, beginning of next year, if it pushes on, and that will be our first choice, is face-to-face. But for some patients, or if you're stable or further down the line, it might be more preferable for you to have a video or a remote consult. And we're trying to learn some things that we've got benefit from over the past 3 months and see if we can carry them forward, so there is a choice of the best form of follow-up for you. Yeah, good experience from Maria, just round the road from me in Tameside. That's great, thanks. Yes, a phone call consult with your usual consultant, letter within a few days. Yeah, there is a potential side benefit in that we've got a few redeployed staff doing our letters, so we're actually slightly quicker than we might usually be with getting information out to you. And certainly for me, when I've had issues where I want to get a message quickly, I'll do the dictation as an urgent, and then it goes out within a couple of days, so that you can have the advice that we'd talk through in a prompt fashion. We also have an option to send a text message, which is quite nice, to give you some extra information of what we've talked through. Yes, and Jane's saying again, she wasn't expecting the telephone consult, and that's really embarrassing for us. We've had an external company that have been commissioned to send out letters to our patients to say what was a face-to-face appointment will become a phone call. And because it's an external company, we've not had a chance to control it. And there'll always be some that slip through the net, but it's really embarrassing for both us and for you if we contact you and you weren't expecting it. I've had somebody last week where I rang them at their 11 o'clock appointment and they were not available, so we just arranged to talk at the end of clinic, so they got a phone call late that afternoon, and we did what would have happened at 11 o'clock. And there is some discussion about that in the medical forums, the idea that running these clinics as remote consults gives a bit more flexibility. And for us, when we've got a backlog of patients who are a bit delayed in getting seen, each of our consultants will have that list with them, and if they reach the end of their clinic and they're a little bit ahead of time, they can just ring a couple of the more urgent patients to catch up with them and help them at that stage. That would be an unplanned phone call, but it's something that could happen in this new remote consultation world, whereas you couldn't suddenly make a patient appear in your wait room because you've had a quieter list and you're free at the end of it. So there is some potential benefit of being able to see people instantly or consult with people instantly over the phone to make sure that we're trying to see as many people as we can in a safe manner and keep people's reviews at a time frame when they should be being seen. There's a question here about the app. Yes, so that's the My SpA, My MY, and then SpA, SPA, which is an app that's come out of one of the hospitals in London with Becky Ansed and the team there. It's available on Android and iPhone, and it allows you to score yourself with the Bath scores. And there's also some nice exercise resources and videos on there. Like I say, there might be something in your trust that will do that for you, or it could be you just go online to the BASDI website, which we'll share a link for, and you can score yourself there. Okay, so yeah, that's a good question that's come through from Kate. So next appointment is going to be with the physio and the team who's going to take my measures. What can you do about this on a phone call? Yeah, so we have experimented with this. I'm part of the A-Stretch National Physios in AS group, and some of my colleagues and myself have tried, not over the phone, but switching to the video consult to then measure the BASMI scores and the spinal movement scores. And if you've got a patient in front of you who's perhaps had the measures done before, and they have a friendly, helpful, supportive relative or housemate that has a tape measure and can do the measures for you under your instruction, it kind of works okay. If you've got somebody who's by themselves and they're having to do the tape measure and the movement and all of that, that's harder to do. Yeah, the question is, how long do we think until we'll be back to face-to-face consults? Well, for some of our patients, we've maintained face-to-face throughout this period. If they're needing joint injection, perhaps, if that's an urgent need that breaks through their kind of social distancing limitations, and these are the patients that aren't in the shielding category, potentially. Or other patients where we've had to bring them in as they're new patients to the service and they need a physical consult to get to that diagnosis. So there has been some work going on in rheumatology departments face-to-face, but that is gradually ramping up now. As I say, in our trust, the document says first choice is remote consult till the end of September. Now that used to say the end of July, and the updated version of the document that came out 5 weeks ago now says the end of September. So that may not be definitive. That it will be October, we're back to face-to-face. It rather depends on how things pan out over the next few weeks and months with that. We're keen to still offer you the best treatment we can, and we're frustrated as a group of clinicians that perhaps we're limited in being able to do the things we'd normally want to do. And if we've been measuring your movement every year for the last 10 years, to not do it this year seems a real shame when it's been so helpful. Historically, we like measuring movement as physiotherapists working in AS because it helps us guide you with the best stretches, the best exercises you can do from there on. Yeah, that's a good question, Nadia. So she's mentioned having your family at the consult could be useful. I mentioned it's useful so they can chip in and help with explaining your symptoms and how you're coping with living with it, but also, yeah, your family can listen to us explaining the disease and how it impacts upon you and why you're struggling. So that's a bit of a two-way conversation if you did want a family member in on the phone call or the video appointment. Okay, so I think there's a question here about should we be calling you on your mobile or your landline? For me, I tend to prefer mobile just because, firstly, it's more likely to be answered because it's going to be nearer you, perhaps. The other thing for me, the only people that ring my landline are my parents, my in-laws, and mostly scam phone calls or people trying to sell me things. So I'll look at caller ID, and if I recognise a family member, I'll definitely answer it. But generally, when the landline goes, the response is, don't really want to get that because it's going to be rubbish. And particularly if it's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, when I know my family don't call, I can predict the landline won't be useful. So yeah, we prefer to use mobile numbers. And if your record at the hospital has a mobile number and a landline, we'll usually prompt for the mobile. For some records that we have, it will actually say on your report, mobile number, landline, patient prefers mobile. So that will always prompt us to do that. And I suppose the other thing I should just mention before I finish is the idea of store and report consultations. So we do have a slight benefit with this remote consult in that not necessarily everything has to cram into that 20-minute slot. And there's some talk in the groups about the idea of having a conversation as our consult. So it could be you email the team a few days before your appointment with your BASDI score. And it's trying to get some of this information outside of the constricted appointment time, but having that conversation around it as well. So there will be some benefits, I think, from us having this period of enforced remote consultation. And for some of you, it will be the option of choice in the future. For others of you, you might have a mixture of remote and face-to-face. And for others of you, it could be face-to-face is the only thing that helps. So let's hope that it's something that will be useful in the longer run. I think I've answered all the questions that have come through. So thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon or watching back after that. I'll highly encourage you to look on the NASS website to find the article that Zoe's written, that I've stolen some bits of from today's talk, and also she's going to put some bits and pieces from today in that article, so you've got a written version of what we've just talked through. And I wish you all the best for your next consultation, whether it be remote, whether it's on the phone, on the video, or if it's further down in the year, whether it's face-to-face. But we do want to give you the best possible care still, no matter what else is going on around us. So pick us up if things aren't going as they should do, and give us a call, and we'll help from there. But thanks very much for your time this afternoon, and hopefully see you soon. Bye.